So welcome back to Third Age Reforged, and as promised this is going to be a battle that I got on Helm's Deep, but a few little bits of housekeeping before we actually get going here. The first one is that I think I'm probably going to be going back to just doing things solidly, like one every 2 days, rather than trying to mix in more. Mainly because I'm a little bit concerned about oversaturating the market for videos, so to speak, because it's not just me that makes Reforged videos, as everyone who watches my channel will clearly know. And I feel as I don't really want to be contributing to just sort of pouring out videos like in an avalanche style format. Because while I'm sure some people will say, yeah, you know, make more, ultimately that's not going to be a good thing, because it will oversaturate the amount of content that is being put out. And ultimately I do think that that has already had a bit of an impact, because generally speaking the average amount of views that is being received has gone down a little bit, mainly because there are so many videos that are being pushed out at the moment. I feel as though, you know, just sort of easing off a little bit is probably the best way to go, because I would rather have slightly fewer videos of sort of better content that people can get their teeth into a little bit more, rather than just sort of pushing out stuff. And in order to sort of have a bigger schedule, I think the best thing to do would not be to just push out loads and loads of Reforged, it would be to have Reforged and something else. But there isn't really something else that I can do at the moment that people would want. I think, you know, the next opportunity to see if I could try and diversify a bit with something else other than Reforged would probably be when Three Kingdoms comes out. But we'll see about that. The other thing is going to be that I have turned Reshade off, and this is more of a sort of this is more mainly because I feel as though the benefits that it offers are kind of not true at the moment. That's for a couple of reasons. One is the lighting for Reshade on the settings that I use makes it much better when it's either at dawn or at dusk. Whereas when it's at midday or an afternoon, like a battle like this, the lighting it's really bright, and even when you turn the brightness down to like 15%, you can still tell that it's a little bit off. And also the fact that Reshade also taxes the game quite significantly, and as I've said a few times recently, the game now is a little bit more taxing on itself. You know, it tends to crash a little bit more often, and Reshade certainly doesn't help that. I feel as though it's a problem which is only really noticeable by, you know, people who do the videos like me and a couple of other people, because we're the only ones that really sort of juice the graphics beyond what they're supposed to be naturally anyway, and obviously this game adds quite a lot. And I feel as though, you know, this also gives me the opportunity to actually turn up some of the settings as well that I wasn't able to use while Reshade was on. So it kind of balances out. The colours might not be quite so vibrant, but I feel as though the overall quality should be relatively similar. And also I feel as though when Reshade is turned on, the weather effects are made even more ugly, which I'm not really a big fan of the weather effects anyway in their current form. But I feel as though with Reshade on, it kind of exacerbates the problem a little bit. So we're just going to be running without Reshade for the time being, but of course open to feedback on that. Now, Helm's Deep. Obviously Helm's Deep, this is technically the modified version of Helm's Deep, because you can actually have 4 attackers now, because the map doesn't spawn the one who's behind Helm's Deep in the mountains where they immediately die now. There's also this little river, sort of little additions that make it a little bit better than it was previously. There was once plans in the works to actually extend into the keep behind, but I think that's been shelved for the time being at any rate. So it's going to be a 3v4, so it's a relatively big siege, and obviously because the map is actually quite simplistic and quite compact in many ways, it's actually not overly long at 37,000 frames. So we'll go through the attackers first of all, starting off with the lads in the hill behind Helm's Deep. Look at the massive cliffs that are over here. Meanwhile, we have the Steward of Dale, who is going to be playing as Rune today. Obviously Rune could be very useful if one of the defenders has invested a lot in the armour. Eastron Clansmen, obviously one of the better militia units in the game, as I've said before. They can have 2 levels of armour upgrades, and their base stats are pretty good. No armour upgrades here though, and obviously they are still very much the cannon fodder of the runic army. Just in behind them we've got some units of Flagrim. Obviously the Flagrim, very much the heart and soul of the runic army a lot of the time, alongside the Gamprim, which we can see just in behind. The 2 of these units add the AP, which Rune is so well known for, on their front line. It makes them potentially very efficient against certain factions, but it can also be a bit of a problem if they're up against factions like Linden, for example, who don't have a lot of armour, because it forces Rune to be a little bit more creative with their composition. But in this case it should be fine, because obviously they can make up a large bulk of the attacking AP. The Scion Room as well, which are actually more expensive than their fellows in the Loka units. The Scion Room, of course, being spearmen makes this kind of odd. But they are very good spearmen. They are very, very survivable, very solid, and they can really tie the centre of your line together, although lines in this sort of situation are not likely to be a huge factor. Meanwhile, a couple of units of Baltroth Tribesmen as well in the late game, the sort of unit that could be very, very effective indeed if they can get into the right position on the walls to start showering down the enemy's final stand. Even early on though, javelins can be used to break initial defensive points. There's another unit of Scion Room over there. Some Eastron crossbowmen, which actually do have the armour upgrade. Eastron crossbows are pretty fragile at the best of times, to be honest with you. So, you know, the armour upgrade will help mitigate the damage somewhat. But obviously, once again, if the crossbows get into the right position, as we've seen before on Helm's Deep, actually, they can do a ton of damage. But they are quite fragile, so they do need to be saved. Back here, we do have the General's unit, which is going to be the Carmel's Chosen again. Obviously, very, very good in a sort of grindy fight, particularly late on. They could be exactly the sort of unit which forces the issue. And obviously, you know, elite units towards the end game can be real aces in the hole for the attackers. And is this the General? No, that's just a banner carrier. So we do have Carmel's Dragon Knights as well. So we do have some Knights for the attackers, which I think the defenders do have some cavalry actually. So this is a fairly decent move. And late on as well, even in a siege as compact as Helm's Deep, they can cause a bit of havoc. So we'll see how they do. Meanwhile, Gandalf may have come from this direction in the movies, but this time it's just going to be an Angmar army under the command of Lord Grixis. And at the back here we can see everyone's favourite unit, the Witchers. The Witchers, I don't think they are overpowered. I think the Witchers are a big risk, because they will either do a ton of damage to the enemy or absolutely no damage at all, and they are expensive. You know, it's not the sort of unit that you'd invest in lightly. And Angmar has got plenty of elites which can be useful just in general. Like, for example, if you bring the Witches, you might have to sacrifice bringing a unit of the Blackguard, and we've seen how impressive the Blackguard can be in the past. You know, the Witches can seem to be so powerful because they are the unit in the game which more than any other can do tons of damage very, very quickly. But for me, particularly on Helm's Deep, which is going to be very difficult for the Witches to get into a good position to actually use their ammunition without being shot, we'll see how they do here. We've got some Angmar Halberds, there's the Ram, and then just in front of them we've got the Blackwatch Legion. The Blackwatch Legion, of course, can be invaluable in this sort of situation when it comes to pushing through enemy lines. There's also got some ladders over here. Witch Realm Pikemen without the armour upgrade, so we just got some rusted armour over here. I think that the Witch Realm Pikemen, I believe anyway, that they are not quite as strong as the Uruk-hai Pikes, or they are sort of very similar. But the Uruk-hai Pikes can be brought in greater numbers, whereas the Witch Realm Pikemen have to sort of content themselves with only having 2 in the army. But even so, they can tie the Angmar line together very, very nicely, and in this sort of situation, provided they don't get shot, they could act as a very nice anchor. Speaking of which, though, we do have the General's Bodyguard, which naturally is going to be the Witch Realm Blackguard. We've seen them be so effective so many times. They tie the Angmar, so they act as the elite centre to an Angmar infantry force so well. You know, they are one of the strongest sword and board units in the game, potentially the strongest. But again, that's always something that's kind of in flux and moving around, particularly now that 0.97 is relatively close. We've got some Blackwatch Legion over here again. Some Trolls, obviously Trolls of Gundabad. You know, when you're on the attack playing as the Orcs, Trolls make the perfect line breakers, and in this sort of situation they can certainly break up the defenders, doing a lot of damage very quickly. More Halberds, more Pikemen, so there's a lot of pole arms here on display from Angmar. Some Snaga, some Guardians of Kharndoom, again just with the rusted armour, make fantastic line infantry. You know, I've praised these guys a lot in the past for good reason, because they act. The other Orc factions tend to have to content themselves with a sort of lower tier line infantry and then sort of sprinkle in a few elites here and there, whereas Angmar can definitely go for a more quality focused approach on their front line, and the Guardians of Kharndoom are a big part of that. I think they still inspire as well. That's the same unit of Stalkers. Got some Angmar Halberds over here, obviously going to be there's a lot of Halberds actually, which the AP could be very useful, but of course they're going to be terrible at taking arrow fire from that defensive position over there. Meanwhile, let's go and have a look. As I overshoot this army entirely, we have Mac Power, who is going to be playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. Obviously a lot of numbers going to be seen from these guys. We've got some Black Uruks of the Mountains, which are two-handed sword units, naturally. A little bit more skill-based. They are not AP, but they act as quite an important part of the Misty Mountains line often, because the Misty Mountains tend to sort of rely on just burying the enemy beneath an avalanche of goblins and then sort of putting pressure on here and there. But the Black Uruks can hold their own in a variety of situations on the front line. They will still lose to mostly equivalent units from like Kingdoms of Men or Elves, but they will at least put up more of a fight than something like these guys, obviously the Heavy Goblin Infantry, as I've said before, they make a decent tar pit. They are actually getting a cost reduction in 0.97, so they will be even more sort of useful as cannon fodder, a little bit more cost effective. But even as they are, you just sort of send them in, and they will do what they can. You know, obviously you don't really want to be. They're good at absorbing arrows. They can fight against low tier militia units from other factions, but for the most part, you're getting them for their numbers, certainly. Meanwhile, over here we have some Heavy Goblin Archers and Heavy Goblin Crossbowmen, 2 units of crossbows actually. So again, if they can get into position late on, they could be really, really useful. The Heavy Goblin Archers, a little bit tougher individually than the Goblin Archers, but there are fewer of them in the unit, so that is a trade-off that you make. Again, we can see the Goblin King's Bodyguard is where the Misty Mountains General is going to be. Not as strong as the likes of the Witch Realm Blackguard, but still a relatively safe place to put your general in this sort of situation for the Misty Mountains. And then, of course, we have where it seems like the Misty Mountains have invested the majority of their money, some Snow Trolls, which they are faster than other trolls, I believe, but this isn't going to be a huge deal on this map. They are still the best Misty Mountains trolls in prolonged combat, however. 2 units of the Cave Trolls, which obviously the Line Breakers. In a settlement as compact as Helm's Deep, it's not likely that the Cave Trolls will actually be as strong as they normally are, but they are still going to be a very useful tool. Obviously, nice model there from Crimson Behelly. The White Hand Trolls from Isengard are getting the same treatment soon. And then we've got the Drake Broodlings, which are extremely high charge, potentially very, very damaging, but also can fall apart very quickly. They're also very expensive. We'll see how they do here, actually. I'd be interested to see how Mac Power uses those. And then finally, we have Mordor, played by Long Live Rhodesia. He's got some Minas Morgul Chosen, obviously strong spearmen. And then he's got a lot of Morannon infantry with the Rams and the Siege Towers. Morannon infantry, obviously the heart of the Mordor army. Orc Javelins as well, cheap, useful in this situation. More Minas Morgul Chosen. A Troll Catapult, which moves more quickly. And of course, when it's out of ammunition, the catapult crew itself is decent. Obviously, compared to dedicated melee trolls, they're not great. But they can at least still do something in melee, unlike a standard catapult crew, which often just gets itself slaughtered. Some Orc Archers, some Morannon Archers as well. Obviously, good to have some form of ranged presence on the field. Looks like 2 units of Morannon Archers and maybe 2 units of Orc Archers. Interesting to see. The Minas Morgul Bodyguard, which is where the Mordor General is going to be hanging out, very similar to the Goblin King Bodyguard in basically every way. And then we've got some Sauron's Will as well. Obviously they can inspire, nice AP damage as well. And then finally 2 more units of Black Legion, so the attackers certainly have got a lot of line breaking potential. Let's see how the defenders are going to counter that. We've got Zace playing as Mirkwood. He's got some Aradirith and some Hiri Peng up on the walls. Master Blaster, who sent me the replay, is playing as Arthedain, dismounted Arthedain Knights. Or dismounted Knights of Anumnas, I should say. Peacekeepers, the Grey Company as well, which the Grey Company are a bit of a risk in this sort of situation, honestly. They are mounted rangers and potentially extremely damaging, but I doubt the attackers are just going to let them have their way with them as they move forward. And we've got Stormrix playing as Cardlin as well, so some Royal Court of House Thorondor, Wardens of Tyr and Gorthard. Again, they're all sort of mixed together, so I might miss a few units while we're in here. We've got some Miniscarithlin Spearmen, some Hiri Peng. Arthedain Marksman with the armour upgrade. Obviously I'm expecting to see a lot of archers, considering a lot of range power at the very least, considering the factions. We've got the crossbows of Cardlin, the Dunedain of Arthedain, obviously the archers from Mirkwood, very, very strong. Marksman over there, Miniscarithlin sharpshooters over here. Here at the back, I can see a variety of units, including Merc War Chiefs, Hiri Ek. There's also the Arthalion E Nanwaith over here. We've seen how strong they can be in recent times, and I'm expecting a good performance from them again today. Hiri Lung, and we've got some Spearmen at the back, and some Hiri Outh as well. And then finally we will be going down here into the lower section of the fortress. Again, we can see some Miniscarithlin sharpshooters with some Thurny Tower here in the settlement as well. Some Thandrim E Erin. We've got some civilians from Master Blaster, as well as some Bandabras archers, and some Wardens of the North as well, obviously AP. That's where the Arthedain General's going to be. I would imagine the Mirkwood General's in the Athalion E Nanwaith. Rangers, very useful in this situation. They need to be used wisely. Could be victory for them. Stormrix has got a ballista, which presumably that is when they do breach the walls to try and shoot down any artillery that the attackers may have. Merc War Chiefs, some Dunedain Captains, which is not the Cardlin General. They don't have the armour upgrade either. A lot of Arthedain Pikemen, some Thandrim E Erin, Hearthguard of Amon Sul, which might be the Cardlin General. I am told, from a very reliable source indeed, that the Hearthguard of Amon Sul are the best of the morale increasing Cardland units, which is understandable. They are a very safe unit to bring in basically any situation because of their durability. Some Troll Slayers and some Maetha Ilaz Gelen, and that's pretty much it. Some more 30 towers, some Greenwatch Garrison archers as well, so some cheap archers just up here on the walls. But without further ado, let's begin. And I don't think I will need to make a cut actually because of the defenders' cavalry presence. I would imagine they are going to immediately sort of charge out the gates, and indeed they are. This is bold, to say the least. But the attackers are going to have to sort of organise themselves. Rune obviously start off a fair distance away, and they're going to have to sort of get a shimmy on to get out here. Meanwhile, see, removing Reshade will help, but it certainly won't cure the frame rate troubles when there are blobs, so you'll have to bear with me on that one. Dunedain Commanders, Royal Court of House Thorondor, good lance cavalry, but they really want to stay away from the Dragon Knights, but the Dragon Knights are also quite far away. And none of the Orc factions have invested in any of their mounted units, as you would kind of expect, to be honest with you, on a map like this. There's the Mountain Trolls, which I actually missed from Mordor. They're charging forwards. The Trolls do take, one of the common misconceptions is that Pikes are strong against Trolls and Trolls are strong against Cavalry. Obviously this can be true, particularly in the fact that Trolls are good in melee against Cavalry, but they can still take a lot of damage off the charge, particularly Mountain Trolls, which are not, they are the lower tier of Trolls, as it were. I'm a little bit confused as to what's going on over here. We can see some infantry is moving out, including some civilians. Trying to maybe break up the advance. Could be useful, but they need to be careful that these units over here don't just get completely overwhelmed. I mean, Dunedain Peacekeepers, again, we saw in the last battle actually on Khan Doom that the Dunedain Peacekeepers were sent forward very aggressively, and they can survive longer than standard spears, of course, but even so, they aren't superhuman. Here we can see the Grey Company, who are now within range, and I think they are going to be going for the Mountain Trolls. Interestingly enough, I don't think the body piercing will actually matter too much because of the spacing of the Trolls. And the Trolls, of course, have got quite a lot of HP compared to equivalent units. And there are, of course, these Orc archers moving up as well. So the Grey Company would do well probably to break off at this point and get out of there. Because Orc archers shooting into Grey Company is exactly the sort of trade that Mordor will really want to make. As I said, the Grey Company, while this area of the battlefield is very open indeed, it's still going to be fairly difficult, I think, for them to be efficient. Their best bet might be against Angmar, but Angmar may very well have had hidden skirmishes that I couldn't see a moment ago, because I believe the Goblin Trackers and Archers can both hide. Some Guardians of Khandu. We can see the Carmel's Dragon Knights have sprinted over here, and that's bad news for the defenders, honestly, because the Dragon Knights will have no qualms whatsoever with trying to shut down this marauding cavalry outside of Helm's Deep's walls. But the Grey Company is now sort of moving in and picking on Angmar, which is probably the only target which is viable at this point in time. If Angmar did indeed not bring any archers, then the Grey Company will essentially be free to shoot them at will. And you can see these Angmar halberds over here taking fire from the walls, the Greenwatch Garrison archers, but in particular the body piercing from the Grey Company is going to be doing enormous amounts of damage to a unit like Halberdiers. And considering the prevalence of pikemen within Helm's Deep as well, I imagine the halberds are not actually going to be hugely effective early on, but they do act as fodder as well, particularly the Orc halberds. The Barrow Wights are here though. They can hide, which is good to see, obviously very useful tool for Angmar. It's going to be difficult actually for the defenders to kill them quickly. Meanwhile, what we've got going on over here, you can see Stormrix is going to be going forward with his Lancers, his Dunedain. The Royal Court of House Thorondor is charging headlong into the Orc archers, and this is going to be a pretty decent charge. They're in loose, so that will mitigate some of the damage, but that's still a lot of damage there. The Dunedain commanders did charge in, but unfortunately the Trolls did intercept, and I think, based on the damage they took, they decided to try and keep going after the archers as opposed to switching their target to the Trolls. And the Dunedain commanders could skewer the Trolls if given half a chance. You can also see the heavy goblin crossbowmen are moving in, and this is the difficulty with being aggressive with cavalry on Helm's Deep. You would imagine, considering it's a Rohirrim settlement, that cavalry plays would be a little bit more viable, but when you've got the attackers who have set their armies out like this, obviously particularly with like the heavy goblin crossbows and the trolls, and obviously the Drake broodlings wouldn't help if they got a good charge off either. It can be difficult to use your cavalry properly, that you can feel quite bottled up and constricted. even though you technically have all of this room. And one of the... You can see the Dragon Knights are down here as well also. The Grey Company are still out here, and the Grey Company, to be fair, they've got this gap over here. And honestly, if I was Master Blaster, I'd probably just send the Grey Company off over here and just leave them, because they can hide anywhere, so they will disappear eventually. Although they're already taking fire from the heavy goblin archers, and you can see several of them falling, the Grey Company. They do have all the same weaknesses as Rangers, not good at taking arrow fire. Now the Camel's Dragon Knights may very well hound them to the ends of the earth, but the Grey Company are significantly faster than the Dragon Knights, so you should be fine. But yeah, the Grey Company. If I was Master Blaster, I'd just send them up into the corner, get them to hide, and then reveal them later on where you can shoot the attacking army in the back. Because that body piercing could potentially be extremely devastating, particularly on all the numbers that the attackers have brought to the field today. We shall see. But I would imagine that the battle is probably going to get into the siege phase fairly quickly, considering it is a 37,000 raid battle. This is a very strange play, I must say, to have all of these units outside the walls. The Band of Brass Archers and the Arcane Marksmen are here. But a single unit of man-at-arms, peacekeepers and civilians each is not going to be enough to sort of survive a full assault from the attackers. You can see that they are sort of bringing their siege towers into position, slowly and surely. Dragon Knight's still chasing after them. What's going on back here? You can see the Drake Broodlings are actually chasing after the Grey Company. And the Grey Company will definitely accept them as a target. They're very expensive, and under sustained arrow fire they do drop, as several of their corpses denote. They are now in the trees. See the trolls, you don't want to be sending the cave trolls after them because they are actually densely packed together. The body piercing would have an effect on them, to be sure. And the cave trolls are far too useful a tool to throw under the bus like that. Meanwhile, you can see over here that actually the first phase of the attack could be getting underway. Lord Grixis and Angmar trying to mount some sort of assault on the walls. Now naturally the Snaga will not get very far. The Thandrimi Erin may be spearmen, but they are elven spears. And that skill is going to be far too much for the Snaga to withstand. Cardlin's cavalry did retreat inside the walls, although... No, honestly, it might be worth Cardlin's time. Like, Angmar was probably the softest target to try and harass, to be honest with you, because between Mordor's cheap archers and the Misty Mountains crossbows, using cavalry in this setting was always going to be difficult against them, but Angmar just look like they've got much in the way of ranged units, and it would just be a case of keeping away from their halberds and pikes, but they were never likely to push their halberds and pikes up to the wall, because they would be the most vulnerable to the litany of archers that the defenders have at their disposal. Meanwhile, we head over here, the Band of Brass Archers and the Arthedain Marksmen starting to shoot into the attackers. They're actually going for the crossbows as well. The crossbows did get into a position, and baiting them forwards would be a good move, and even if they miss crossbows they would still hit some manner of orc or goblin. But I would still worry for these forces that they've committed outside the gates, to be honest with you. You can see the gates did open, and it looks as though, yep, the Cardlin cavalry is coming back for another bite of the cherry. You can see now that the Misty Mountains moving forward with several units of their heavy goblins. Looks like they're going to go and man the siege towers and try and mount an assault on the lower sections of the walls. But this is a good opportunity actually for Cardlin's cavalry to do something while the attackers are trying to manoeuvre into a position where they can start assaulting the walls. The lancers can start to do a lot of damage. It looks as though they're making a beeline for the Snaga over here. And the Snaga, needless to say, will not stand up too well to a charge from the Royal Court. Here they go. They are in loose though, so it won't connect with too much of the unit. Indeed, only 6, 7, 8 die on that charge. But to be fair, the area they charged maybe wasn't the best. Tharbad Warhammer's up on the wall, so it's not getting any easier for the Snaga, no matter where they go. The unit I commanded, you can definitely see the attackers now starting to put some real pressure on the areas that the defenders have decided to go into outside of the walls. Cardlin's cavalry is really bottom feeding at the moment by just picking off scraps of Snaga. They could do with getting a nice charge into something a little bit more meaty. The Barrow Wights could be a good move, although they did actually get their lancers out. Yeah, the Barrow Wights taking some damage there. And they do need to cycle charge because the Barrow Wights will not take any prisoners in melee. Even though they don't have the highest stats, they've got the hit points to withstand sustained melee combat for a long time. But getting rid of the Barrow Wights would be a real boon for the for the defenders. Meanwhile, as we move over here, we can see that the Arthedain men-at-arms are not enjoying their time being overwhelmed by the goblin filth. The Dunedain peacekeepers, they aren't really here in huge numbers either, and needless to say, the civilians, not exactly the last word, they're already thinking about routing. The heavy goblin infantry, in big enough numbers, it can prove to be a real menace, and the Black Uruks are moving forward now actually as well, so this will definitely be the dismounted Knights of Illuminus are coming forward, so Master Blaster is intent on committing to this sort of outer defence, which I suppose, considering the cavalry, could be a good move, although to be fair, these Dunedain commanders have made a colossal error in judgment by trying to charge through the Black Uruks. The Black Uruks are taking damage, but they've forced the Dunedain commanders to rout as a result, so not good for the defenders. They still have the Royal Court, but now that the Dragon Knights have found them, so to speak. I can't see the Grey Company on the radar anymore, so it's entirely possible that they actually all died. That would be quite the thing to miss. The Royal Court is now running away, presumably because it's Cardlan's general. And Cardlan's morale, they don't want to lose their general too early. It wouldn't be a game-breaking thing, but it certainly wouldn't help the defenders. Dunedain peacekeepers, now the Black Uruks are getting into melee after, despite taking a lot of damage, they were the cause of the Cardlan cavalry routing. The Arthedain marksmen and the Band of Brass archers still trying to do their bit. Still hunting the heavy goblin crossbows, and they've done a good job of that. Meanwhile, the goblin infantry actually now, the dismounted Knights of Illuminus have turned this fight around a bit, with the peacekeepers and the men-at-arms now reinforced by... And those siege towers will really sneak up on you. What a cunning move. Yeah, obviously the dismounted Knights of Illuminus, the strongest of Arthedain's dedicated infantry units. Again, another one of the strongest sword and board units that you can hope to see. But we do now have some moves for the walls, and it is actually the Misty Mountains once again. Now you can see, obviously, Rune's army is now at the top of that hill. Angmar has basically fully moved down. Thurney Tower are shooting at units as they move forwards. These strong clansmen have really run forwards quickly.
Our enemy's ladders have reached our walls. It's time for butcher's work.
Trying to break up the attack and making them not all move in at once is perhaps a good move, because obviously if it turns into just a battle of sheer attrition between numbers, there's only going to be one winner. The Band of Brass archers are moving forward. They've got their knives out, getting into melee. The Black Uruks actually defeat does seem certain. That damage they took from the cavalry proving to be quite telling as they fight the Dunedain peacekeepers, who, with their skill, proving that not all spearmen feel the malice as much as others. And now we have the dismounted Knights of Illuminus, who have taken virtually no damage. I mean, they're tanking all of this sort of basic infantry. The Morannon infantry is slightly better than the heavy goblins, but the dismounted Knights of Illuminus will obviously still win. And actually, to this end, the Misty Mountains are committing forward some trolls. The snow trolls will probably have a pretty catastrophic effect on them, to be honest with you. The snow trolls will do damage, and this is sort of, particularly if they're saturating this area with trolls, the cave trolls are coming forward. This is a good opportunity for someone to try and kill the cave trolls, however, because robbing the attackers of them when they actually come to try and enforce their way through choke points will be very useful. The only thing they'll really have to worry about then will be the Great Shield units from Angmar and Mordor. Orc archers getting into position. They don't have the best shot, but they will still be doing damage. In particular, I would hope that the Rangers aren't firing just yet. They aren't, but the Rangers would be the ideal target for the attackers. Meanwhile, the heavy goblin infantry is coming up on the walls. They took damage on the approach, and now even the Black Uruks are not doing well. Although, to be fair, the Black Uruks are fighting Dunedain captains. So this initial wave is likely to be thrown off pretty quickly. The Misty Mountains taking a lot of the early casualties here. But then again, it is what the goblins tend to do quite well. Tharbad Warhammers are over here also. And needless to say, this is one of the most one-sided fights you could ever hope to see. Heavy Goblin Infantry taking on Tharbad Warhammers. Obviously an extremely impressive AP shock unit. There are a lot of Heavy Goblin Infantry, and they are actually forcing a little gap up onto the walls here. Interesting to note, actually, that I don't think... Well, the attackers do have that catapult.
half their men.
But they have sort of utilised a lot of the walls for siege towers and ladders, which actually might help the defenders in the long run, because taking on enemies as they come out of siege towers is actually, in my opinion, on this map in particular, better than attempting to sort of hold off multiple choke points and holes in the wall. So a bit of a reprieve from them there. Obviously Snaga as well, it's not getting any easier for them. They're going up against Merc War Chiefs and some Arthedain Men-at-Arms. Snaga, of course, not really equipped to beat anything one-to-one in melee outside of like Orc fodder. But now we can see over here this initial outer defence that Master Blaster put up, which was an interesting idea. I would say it's kind of worked out fairly neutrally, although at this point he really does need to fall back within the gates, because the trolls, when the trolls came forward, they definitely inflicted a heavy toll on the defenders, and actually at this point the gate might not even close. The trolls are going to be able to get in, which is a bit of a shame, although the trolls are being perhaps a little bit overly aggressive. The Dunedain Troll Slayers are here, although again I feel as though Master Blaster really needs to not commit forwards units like Troll Slayers into a situation like this. When you've got like a blob of trolls coming up like this, the best thing you can do is just mob them with a blob of infantry. If you can help it, a blob of decent quality infantry backed up by fodder. Because then hopefully the majority of the damage will be taken by the fodder and you can start inflicting a lot of damage on the trolls. Now this push looks like it could carry all the way to the town centre, but I can promise you that it won't. The cave trolls, they burn out pretty quickly. They've got good line breaking capabilities, but in terms of sustained combat they're not the best. So this is probably where you'll start to see things go the way of the defenders over here. The Minotaur Romen Guardians will also be shooting into them. And they've got enough quality over here. The Wardens of Tir Gorthad will take damage to the trolls, but I think they will burn out fairly soon. Meanwhile, looks like that... Well, there's been some routing, clearly. The first wave of assault has not gone too well, and more low-tier units are just being fed in over here. The Tharbad Warhammers, all too happy to accept another low-tier unit that they can slaughter. Snaga Stalkers, obviously not the most heavily armoured, but doesn't really matter when you're talking about a unit as good as the Tharbad Warhammers. There's Barrow Wights, which are actually fighting. Ah, I see. This is perhaps a little bit more of a problem for the defenders, because the Barrow Wights are going to get up onto the walls, and the defending forces over here will not be able to kill them quickly enough, and they will cause gaps to appear. And you can see just in behind them there are Flagrim waiting to follow them up, which is one of the ideal units to follow them up with, actually. The Barrow Wights forming the gaps and then get an AP infantry unit up there on the walls as well to start dealing damage to some of this infantry. A problem now, of course, is that the Troll Catapult is now in range, and they're going to start poking holes in the walls. Now, fortunately, they do have the resources down here to put up a good front line. They've got pikemen. I would still worry about the Blackwatch Legion and the Black Legion of Barad-dûr coming forwards and pushing the pikes out of the way, but I think, even if they did, there's going to be enough in the way of infantry to make that not really viable. The Great Shield units, like the Trolls, tend to burn out pretty quickly, and indeed, over here, just as I was about to segue into the Trolls, it would appear they've died even more quickly than I was expecting.
Our cunning foe has reached our walls with their siege tower. We must repel them.
So they did a lot of damage early on there, the Trolls. They did damage to the Dunedain Troll Slayers. They, did damage obviously to the outer infantry. They broke Master Blaster's initial force. But I feel as though Mac Power probably should have known when to cut his losses and stop using the Trolls, because he pushed forward the Trolls with basically no support. And Trolls without support is not great, particularly when it's Cave Trolls, because Cave Trolls, they need infantry to back them up. As soon as they smash through a line, they need the infantry then to sort of solidify that position for the attackers. Unfortunately for the Misty Mountains, I feel as though he's already committed forward a lot of his resources already, so he probably would have needed his Mordor ally to do that for him. But as it were, the defenders have come out of this not too badly. I mean, they've still taken losses, and again, it's probably fairly neutral at this point in time, I would say, with regards to the engagements over here. The outer defence initially went quite well, then collapsed completely because of the Trolls. And then the Trolls moved forward a little bit too recklessly, and they finished them off with all of these pikes, spears, and other assorted units. Therny Tower that are out of ammunition there. There is damage being done to the walls. Still some Thantrum errands, so some Morannon infantry also coming forward. A lot of depleted units, actually, which are already shaken on the approach, as the frame rate shudders a little bit. The Dunedain Rangers are firing at something. It's a little bit difficult to see what. Shooting over here.
Something changes in the course of battle, for defeat seems almost certain.
It could be the Witchround Pikemen. Although based on the fact that they're in loose, again, ranges are the sort of thing which you really need to use to full effect. As you see the wall starting to crumble there. And Rune getting ready. You can see that actually over here, as the frame rate continues to drop in the presence of the wall, the gap that the Barrow Wights created, graciously used by the Flag Rim, and this is an area where the attackers are having some joy. There wasn't really an elite unit over here. And now the attackers starting to pile on the pressure down here in the lower portion of the settlement. And the Flag Rim doing a good job here against the Merc War Chiefs and the Arthedain Men-at-Arms. Obviously, it's exactly the sort of fight the Flag Rim like. And I'm not sure how this is going to go. I mean, the Tharbad Warhammers are over here, actually now fighting against Barrow Wights. And again, Barrow Wights are they're a really awkward unit to try and fight. I certainly wouldn't send a single elite unit like the Tharbad Warhammers at them. As soon as I saw the Barrow Wights coming, I probably would have pulled the Tharbad Warhammers off the wall, honestly, because they're too important a unit to lose, particularly in the late game. They could be really handy. You know, the best way to deal with Barrow Wights is honestly probably to try and shoot them, keep them occupied with some low tier unit and then try and shoot them. Meanwhile, Rune coming in here into this lower section of wall. The Thurney Tower attempting to hold the line, as the Arthedain pikemen are going to be right there to back them up. But again, this is sort of a classic attacker move using their pure numbers. And the defenders, one of the mistakes I often see defenders make is when they see this sort of thing happening, they don't then either retreat or commit more resources to try and stop it. They just sort of sit there and let it happen. You need to make a choice at this point. It's fight or flight. And they need to do something rapidly here, because if they don't, you're going to have Runic and Angmar forces pouring in all over this lower section of the wall, and several of these units would actually then be stuck, and you don't want to lose units like Miniscarithan Sharpshooters and Hearthguard of Amon Sul to a shoddily constructed sort of outer defence. And in particular, you can see these pikemen. One unit of pikes is not sufficient, and again, the defenders, you need to see this sort of thing coming. Make the Ilaz Gallener up here. Over here, actually, though, things are still going relatively well. Against these more basic units of sort of Moranon units, and even against the Flag Rim, the Elven skill is carrying the day. But up here, actually, there isn't an assault going on up through the gates. It seems as though the attackers are now sort of fully committed to trying to take this lower settlement after they lost the trolls. They could still, technically speaking. What's going on over here? Trying to hit some of these archers up on the walls, and actually if you do hit the wall in such a way, archers will sort of fall off and die. Whole units will die instantly. That's more of a bug than anything else, though, not an intentional feature. And you can see actually the attackers' intention is clear, because the Blackwatch Legion are coming forward. Here come the Dunedain Troll Slayers, and with their axes in melee they should be able to do a fair amount of damage. The Blackwatch Legion are not likely to enjoy going through the Troll Slayers directly. But this is still a problem for the defenders. Obviously, this is exactly the sort of thing that the Blackwatch Legion are designed for. But they are going to take a lot of damage, and as they come through to the other side, you would imagine that another unit is going to come here and back them up. There's also javelins flying into that blob from the Maitha Ilaz Gelen. And while the attackers are making some decent ground over here, they are still taking some pretty horrendous losses. You can see that there are actually some routing from the low-tier Orc units. Even the Scion Rim are wavering at this point, so the javelins, all of the damage they're taking from the pikes and the Dunedain Troll Slayers and other such units is taking its toll. And this is the risk with mash pushing. It doesn't work 100% of the time. You can see how quickly the Blackwatch Legion fell apart. They made a gap, but they died so quickly that the attackers weren't really able to make use of that gap in any way. This did still inflict casualties on the defenders as well, mind you. And the defenders have much less manpower to play with than the attackers, so the Tharbad Warhammers actually did really well against these Barrow Wights over here. So they've managed to kill off 2 low tier units and a unit of Barrow Wights all on their lonesome, although I would imagine that this is probably where their luck starts to run out. The Carmel's Shadow Guard are no slouches in melee. But maybe the Tharbad Warhammers can continue to make a nuisance of themselves. Meanwhile, the Barrow Wights sort of single filing down the steps into a pike line. The pikes don't do their damage quickly at the best of times, and they won't kill off Barrow Wights all that quickly either. But the defenders have actually got a pretty decent defense going on still down here. So the percentage of kills, you know, the defenders are ahead, but only just, and you know this could turn against them quickly. But we've got more Morannon infantry just pouring in. But again, the Morannon infantry is really making no headway here. A combination of Thandram Erin and Arthedain men-at-arms is holding them back very, very easily. In other sections of the walls where the Barrow Wights first cleared the way and then they sort of moved up with more elite runic units like the Flag Rim, they had a little bit more success, but with the heavy goblins and with the Morannon infantry, they've really not made too much of a dent. I think the Rangers are out of ammo though, which is a bit of a shame for them. But more reinforcements coming through this one. That was an awful lot of friendly fire. I think the best thing that the attackers can do at this point is, you know, make a hole in the wall here, make 2 holes in the wall, because then the defenders, you'll crumble the defence if you do that. They won't be able to hold every angle at once, but if you keep it to just this one section over here, they'll continue to be able to reinforce this area. And if you keep getting friendly fire as well, that's going to cause some pretty severe morale penalties. And you can actually see over here, there's routing going on, the ballista is doing a ton of damage. And the pike line, you can actually see over here that this water acts as a little bit of a barrier by the looks of things. Maitha Ilaz Gallant, again, the javelin fire, the artillery fire, the crossbow bolts flying in. The defenders have done a really good job at managing this situation. You can see that's a ton of routing there. Eventually the attackers are probably going to be able to overwhelm this outer defence, you would imagine. But it might cost them so much that they might not be able to take this upper fortress over here. You can see the Hiri Pang still waiting, and actually I think the defenders are actually counter-attacking down here. You can see that some Arthedain men-at-arms going up against Orc archers that are actually pushing the ram now with the help of the Morannon infantry. The Wardens of the North, which presumably they also have used up their ammunition getting into melee, and Orc archers and Morannon infantry are going to be no match for the Wardens of the North. A very strong unit in melee as well as at range. And this is interesting. I do like how aggressive Arthedain has been throughout this battle. There are still tools which the attackers can use, because it's actually looking fairly grim for them at the moment. I mean, they've still got a fair amount of reserves, good units in reserve as well. But they do still have tools like, obviously, the catapult, which if it gets good hits off, could start to crumble this outer defence quickly. They've also got the Witchers, they've got the Blackguard, they've got plenty of units they can still use and be effective with. More units coming in. Arthedain Pikemen. There's actually what looked like, yeah, the Balchoth tribesmen, which presumably have been throwing their payloads, now being committed to melee. I mean, slowly and surely you can see these sort of banks of Arthedain pikes start to lose their manpower. You can also see here that the Royal Court of House Thorondor is still trying to get some charges off, and it actually causes a break there from some heavy goblin infantry, so anything you can do to break up the attack, which the routing here has honestly proved to be the attacker's bane, because they've sort of been going in and out like the tide at the moment. A lot of their routing units will inevitably return, but even when they do return, not in the best of positions. Goblin trackers being sent packing by the Merc War Chiefs. And amazingly, the Tharbad Warhammers are still here. That was an interesting sound. I think, yeah, they hit some of their own men again. I think at this point, you know, the attackers really need to open up another section of the wall. Otherwise, they're just going to be continuing to go in here. They do actually get a decent hit there, but again, it's mainly on Greenwatch Garrison archers, not really a prime target. Yeah, they need to open up another hole in the wall and push through too, because at this point I don't think the defenders really have the numbers to hold 2 areas at once. But let's see. And actually over here, they ran out of steam in this attack. There's only a few Barrow Wights left. You can see that when they advanced down the stairs, they were then rebuffed, and Arthedain men-at-arms have pushed them back. And in this sort of numbers, Barrow Wights will not be able to have the effect they want. Gamper moved forward. You can see that, you know, units that did rout off have now returned. Snaga skirmishers are actually in here now, using their javelins. There's a troll officer in here. These javelins are doing a good job. They're whittling down the pikes even more. That was a good hit. You know, the catapult has honestly been more of a detriment than a help at this point. But they need to get through this lower defence fairly soon, I think, because honestly, the longer this goes on, the better the defenders will be feeling about this. I mean, they've already felt confident enough to counter-attack down here, and you can see that the Wardens of the North have just absolutely curb-stomped the Orc archers and the Morannon infantry. And this is going to prove to be another problem. I mean, the Orc javelins are now shooting into the Wardens of the North, which is not great for Arthedain. Honestly, it'd probably be worth them retreating at this point in time, because it's not the sort of unit you want to lose, and you can see that even under cheap javelin fire, because of how exposed they are, the Orc Javelin's getting some very nice value off. They could actually kill off this unit of Wardens of the North, which would be a real boon for the attackers at this point, because they need something to go right for them here. Trolls are actually getting up onto the walls at this point. The Hearthguard of Amon Sul are still down here, though. I mean, it's not as if the defenders have decided to lightly defend this outer part of the settlement. They've got some good units down here. The Minotaur Romen Guardians still have ammunition, and even when they run out, they will still be a really useful unit. Another polearm unit down here. That AP certainly won't hurt against all of these orcs either. Nathan Ilaz Geller, out of ammunition now. They've done a good job so far. They're not great in melee in my experience, but still, the Elven skill will help them against the more basic orcs. And it has been a victory over here. Oof. That was only a grazing hit there on the Minotaur Romen Guardians. Gamprim, victory is a distinct possibility. Slowly but surely they are running out of pikes, although to be fair, the Wardens of Tir Gorthad are over there, they could commit them. The Royal Court is still here as well, which could be useful if any attackers do get through. A sneaky charge will work wonders on that, particularly with how flimsy the morale so far from the attackers has seemed to be. Even Rune, who, you know, their basic units will have slightly better morale than the Orcs, have not been having the best of times, although to be fair, that Troll Catapult has been a real renegade so far. The ones of the North did escape, 25 of them left, and at this point, just a couple of Arthedain marksmen doing their bit. The Black Legion of Barad-dûr, so it does look as though the attackers are once again going to try and attack up this way again. The Aradirith are over here though, and the defenders looking a little bit thin on the ground over here perhaps. But they're going to need more than the Black Legion, I think, to make this attack stick. They're going to need a unit of more quality infantry. Something like the Sauron's Will introduced over here behind the Black Legion could make a bit of a difference, because honestly they've committed forward a lot of their units at this point. They've kept back a lot of the Mirkwood heavy hitters back in the town centre, which is probably worrying the attackers a little bit, because they've still got to deal with a bunch of the Hir-e Lung, Ek, and Alth, not to mention the Athalion Nanwaith, which are real destroyers of worlds when they get going. But now we can see more trolls coming forward. We can see the Troll Catapult crew is in here, along with the Trolls of Gundabad, Witchrealm Pikemen, Blackwatch Legion, so this is the second big push, or maybe even the third big push, you could say. And you can see that the Pikes are getting into position again, reinforcing another unit of Arthedain Pikemen, the Wardens of Tir Gorthad, with their morale boosting capabilities. And we can see a unit of the Minisker Rithlin Sharpshooters introducing their maces to the mix as well. That AP will be really useful actually. The announcer still reckons the attackers have the advantage, and often when, you know, they are outnumbered by an army, they are right, even if the attackers are having a rough time of it. Ultimately their numbers see them through, especially when there are 3 Orc armies on the fields. But I mean, you know, being... Again, it's that final stand, I think. Considering they've still got all of those really strong Mirkwood units in reserve, it could be real tricky if the attackers have lost so much of their manpower out here. And I think if this push doesn't work, the defenders are sitting pretty. The Troll Catapult won't do too well. I mean, the Trolls of Gundabad, the damage that they can dish out is pretty substantial. Minisker Rithlin Sharpshooters.
The enemy are battering down our gates.
Again, that mace in melee, going to prove to be a real boon here. The Sauron's Will is now forward, and the extra AP that they offer, in addition to the Blackwatch Legion sort of breaking up the line, I think this is probably where, and again, more Sauron's Will, so I think this is probably where the lower defence starts to struggle. And you can actually see over here as well, the Carmel's Shadow Guard getting up onto the walls. I think the defenders might actually hold them off for a little while. Obviously, the Misty Mountains units which can hide. The Blackback Mountain Berserkers are coming forward now, so they're not playing around this time. This time they want to destroy this lower defence. And they need to, actually, with all of this committal of resources, they're going to need to win this. The gates did close, but now they are opened once more. I did see the Ballista just fire in there. And this has proven to be a real problem, actually. The Cardinal Ballista has done so much damage. You can see that once again, the lower tier Angmar units are just routing in the face of that Ballista. The Dunedain Troll Slayers are over here, and actually the Ballista is able to continue firing. The Trolls were trying to push through, but they've been interrupted by the Troll Slayers. And once again, the morale penalties that this push is going to be inflicted by the ballista, that the ballista is going to be inflicting on this push is going to be substantial. Hearthguard of Amon Sul being committed to the front line now as well, so it's not getting any easier for them to push through here. The attackers might need to commit more men forwards even. If these Baltroth tribesmen have ammunition, that will be really important, and with the addition of those black-backed berserkers, could be the sort of thing which tips this defence over the edge, but the attackers have really had to pay for every inch here. Again, very often on Helm's Deep you'll see more than one hole poked in the wall, and this really showcases why, because the attackers could more easily have forced the defenders to retreat back up to the keep. Well, Carmel's Shadowgush victory seems certain against the Miniska Rithlin sharpshooters. Difference in quality there. Dedicated melee infantry as well. What's going on over here? The Orc Javelins trying to take some pot shots through the gates, and actually you can see now Mirkwood are starting to commit forward some of their nastier units that they were holding back. Here at Ek, they don't want them to get sprayed down by Orc Javelins, however. But this defense over here, considering they've got units ready to reinforce from the walls as well, should be okay. But what's... Ooh, here we go. We can see the Drake Broodlings are coming forward. Some Arthedain men-at-arms being committed forward. The Trolls are now into the ballista, or at least one of them. The lone survivor managed to get there. And honestly, without the ballista, this defence is going to crumble pretty quickly. Greenwatch Garrison Archers are being sent at Blackback Berserkers, which is how you know things are getting a little bit desperate. The Hearthguard of Amon Sul, I mean, the Drake Broodlings could die here. The Hearthguard will stand their ground pretty resolutely against them, but now you can see, like when you see sort of the forces of darkness pour forwards like this. Oh, and here go the Witchers. That's a hefty amount of damage, but it is only on Arthedain men-at-arms. Interesting choice of target. I mean, the Witchers don't have the most ammunition, and the Witchers are honestly the sort of thing which in the late game, into the final stand against all of those elite Mirkwood units, a single shot from the Witchers could turn the match on its head, but again, that's still a good amount of damage though. I mean, if you're robbing the defenders of what manpower they have, it's still going to be a worthwhile endeavour. It's not like you can waste ammunition when it's into a blob anyway. But yeah, the Carmel Shadow Guard are going to be able to defeat this unit of Miniska Rithlin sharpshooters. Not for free, they did take damage, but even so. I mean, honestly, the attackers, they do still have some reserves, like the Carmel's Chosen, and a few units still just sort of waiting outside the walls, like the Goblin King Bodyguard. But they did commit forward most of their forces, so it did take a lot of effort on their part to take this lower settlement. But by the same token, it is worth saying that the defenders also committed a lot of resources to this out of defence, which could end up hurting them in the long run. Arthedain men-at-arms having to go up against the AP of the Sauron's Will, so not an ideal situation for them. Dunedain Troll Slayers could be worth retreating. They're going to try and save their ballista. I'm not sure whether they're going to be able to though. See these Maitha Ilaz Galen? I mean, they'll obviously be able to kill Orc Javelins in melee. Absolutely no problem whatsoever, but the ballista was never going to be able to get away from there. It was a valiant effort, and actually I think that is the Cardland General. He was in the ballista, so he may very well die here. Oh no, General, get out of there. You don't stand a chance against the Berserkers. So yeah, this is the end of the outer defence, it's fair to say. But a resolute outer defence, I must say, from the defenders. Most of the time on Helm's Deep, the outer defence does not last as long as that. This is interesting. Hiri Peng being committed forwards. There goes the Cardland General. Hiri Peng being committed forward. These Orc Javelins are not going to enjoy this fight all that much. And actually some Thandrimi errand, so the defenders are not done yet down here. They are still eager, and that might be because it'll be easier to skirmish down their forces out here. E-Strong Crossbows, again, not the sort of unit you really want to see. Witchround Blackguard. Meanwhile, over here we do now have a fight in earnest happening in the gate. So we see the Minas Morgul Bodyguard going in here. But there are Elven, Cardland and Arthedain units over here which are holding them at bay, and obviously they are spears, so they don't kill off their units all that quickly. Over here, on the other hand, this unit of Dunedain Troll Slayers was very quickly the target of the Black Legion of Barad-dûr. And over here you can actually see the Aradirith Amon Lank, which The Aradirith with their AP should be a fairly good counter to the Black Legion. Like, you know, Great Shield units, as I said before, there are only 2, but both of them don't do too well when they're in melee with like a really strong unit. The Aradirith certainly counters that, especially with the AP, makes them doubly dangerous. The Wardens of the North are on the front line, but the defenders are still doing relatively well over here. I mean, the amount of resources the attackers can afford to commit to the main gate is now very limited. I don't think they have any reinforcements over here, they don't. So if this attack fails, the attackers have no choice but to find other ways in. To be fair though, there are Witcher-on Blackguard up here, which, you know, against Arthedain Men-at-Arms there's only going to be 1 victor in that fight. What's going on down here? So this sort of very bold elven move ultimately is probably not going to pan out. You can actually see the Eastron crossbows and the Snaga skirmishers also taking their toll on this like little Mirkwood counter-attack, which ultimately hasn't worked out all that well. Maybe a little bit reckless. I do like aggression, but this one was probably a little bit poorly planned. Aradirith falling back, and again, it is mostly Mirkwood at this point. There are a few individual units from Cardlin and Arthedain, but at this point it's going to be down to whether or not the skill and sort of overall high stats of Mirkwood is going to be enough to see them through, and it might be. I mean, the Witcher-on Blackguard are up here. They're one of the few units which is sort of going to be able to genuinely cause some problems. The Carmel's Chosen as well. The Witches are still lurking somewhere. But as a single unit, you have to say at this point the Athalion Nanwaith are probably the strongest on the field. Now it's going to be a matter of whether or not they can deny the attackers using like their crossbows, javelins and their witches to win the fight for them. Try and turn it into a battle of skill. The Black Legion are advancing forward, probably going to try and push through this this defensive line. I'm not sure whether they're going to have much success at that. Because again, the Black Legion overall, well, they are going to push through, but they're going to take a pretty hefty cost for doing so. And actually there is a single Dunedain Ranger doing his best. The Witcher-on Blackguard's still fighting on. And they will just be able to carry on this momentum. The Hiri Pang will not be able to defeat Blackguard in melee, even on their best day. They're going to try and shoot point blank into them, which might actually be the best way to try and deal with this. They'll at least do more damage and at the very least take away their hit points for later in the fight. While this Hiri Lang coming over here, you can see that the defenders are very eager to try and bring this attack down, because then they only have to focus potentially on this one choke point. We are now within the final 10,000 frames, incidentally. These pikemen have come out here, but this defense is not going to last too much longer, and they really don't want to get all of these units surrounded if they can help it at all. Aradir still got their bows out. 3 units of Hirialth and a unit of Athalion Nanwaith. Is that going to be enough? I'm not so sure. The defenders are now 5 percentage points behind. It's not an impossible task, but it's looking unlikely. Still some Wardens of the North alive, only 12 of them, but I mean at this point this attack is not looking too great. I mean the Minas Morgul Bodyguard are here. Multiple HP will certainly help. Hirialth. I think the Elven player at this point, if he's going to send individual units out here, he should just send everything. Because leaving some units in reserve at this point is a fool's gambit. Because really, you know, how much are these 3 units really going to do on their lonesome? They're going to need support. So at this point, if you're going to sort of send units to defend this outer ring, you need to just send everything, in my opinion. Got some Hiri Lang there, which they need to charge into the back, which they're going to, which will probably diffuse this attack, which is good to see. This could be the sort of thing which starts to, maybe this is the turn of the tide. Hiri Lang are certainly no pushovers either. And this will also be the end of the Mordor General. Meanwhile, we've got some Carmel's Chosen up here, who went the same route as the Blackguard, who have actually taken more losses. Well, they've taken more damage, I should say, at the hands of the Hiri Peng than I gave them credit for, but something which is perhaps more worrying is the Dragon's Wrath Guiltman. Their projectiles don't do as much damage as something like the Witcher's, not nearly as much, but it's still a problem for them, and even then in melee, they've got very high skill, one of the units which can actually go toe-to-toe with the elves. These elven units need to be committed at this point, I'm sorry. You know, them sitting here is a waste. You know, all of these... The defenders are not going to win without these units out here. Which, for me, is the problem. You know, for me, these units now, they need to just form up and all be pulling in the same direction. And it's not even as if they need to coordinate through the team, because it's really just Mirkwood on their own at this point. So it's really just down to them. I mean, these Hirialth are actually still... There's some Goblin infantry back there. E-strong crossbows. Not really with the best shot. There's still some Snaga. But yeah, this Hirialth needs support real bad. The Blackguard taking losses at the hands of the Hiripang, but ultimately going to be victorious. Yeah, and that's going to be the end. That there is... That, for me, is a sign of a bit too much passivity being punished, actually. You know, he was... Clearly the Mirkwood player was very eager to sort of keep these men in reserve, and he still is. But he's been punished for that. An entire unit, basically, of Hirialth has been burnt to a crisp, and I think that's probably going to be the last of the defenders' hopes in this battle. And it's a shame, because I think for a long time they had a decent chance at winning this. And they were aggressive in all the right portions of this battle, actually, if before, but now... Late on, they lost... Well, the Mirkwood player lost his bottle a little bit, and he needed to sort of... When you know the enemy have got witches, you need to keep track of them. They're hard to keep track of. It's such a small unit. They blend in with their dark colouring. But you need to. It's your responsibility to. There goes the Mordor General. Just having a look at the percentages. Yeah, that... And now you can see that this is where Helm's Deep starts to turn on the defenders a little bit. Because it also offers the attackers the ideal vantage points to start putting their own skirmishes up there. And especially when it's crossbows, we've seen in the past... that they can do such nasty damage. And the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen are over here now, and as I've said, they have high skill. Their skill, I believe, is 24 defensive skill, which is actually higher than a lot of Elven units, interestingly enough. But then they are assassins, and they are quite expensive for what they offer, so I think we can forgive them that. But over here, these units over here have been sort of isolated and picked off. The Carmel's Chosen proving to be a cornerstone of this assault. It was looking pretty grim in the middle section of this battle for the attackers, but I feel as though here in the late game they coordinated themselves much better than the defenders, which has ultimately led to their victory. These Snaga skirmishers are fighting the Rangers. Honestly, there aren't many Rangers left, which they're shaken in the face of the Snaga. The mighty Snaga indeed. Hiripang taking chips at the Witch Realm Blackguard, but ultimately not going to be able to kill them quickly enough. And, you know, the attackers don't have much left, to be fair. I mean, Goblin Infantry, Snaga, Balchoth Tribesmen, the Goblin King's Bodyguard. Yeah, they've committed forward basically everything of note that they have. I'm very confused as to what the Mirkwood player is honestly doing at this point. Like, these units are just impotently walking around, waddling around the town centre, and that's a real shame. I think what he's doing... yeah, see, he moved over there, now he's moving back. There goes the Arthedain General at the hands of a runic officer, actually. Now, these are Thalioni Nanway. They could go along this outer wall here and start, you know, focusing down these squishy skirmishers. But again, they've lost their nerve and they're running away. Well, that would be Cardlan, I believe, that's finally succumbed. Oh, these Hirialth have... And it just goes to show what a unit of Hirialth is capable of. They had 3 units of Hirialth, which they could have committed to this line. And this would have held indefinitely. And then what they could have done, sent our Arthalioni Nanwaith onto this outer wall, very slowly but surely chewing along this. The Witch Realm Blackguard would have been a bit of a problem, but even then, even if the Arthalioni Nanwaith ultimately lost to the Witch Realm Blackguard, they still would have killed off a ton of units in the way, taken away the attacker's skirmish power a lot. And then it would have been a case of whether the Hirialth and other sort of units down here could have tanked out the remaining units. They still could have lost, but it would have been closer, I think. Again, this is a mistake I've seen people make a lot in my time doing 3rd Age Reforged. It's when you're the defenders being overly passive, waiting for the attackers to come to you, trying to sort of save units like this, when there really is no point, because ultimately, you know, you committed stuff forward, you're not going to have enough. When push comes to shove, you're not going to have enough, you're not going to be able to cover both angles. And maybe this points to a little bit of inexperience. Maybe I'm being a little bit harsh on Zace here. You know, maybe he's a newer player, I haven't seen him in a replay before, but even so, this is maybe a little bit of a lesson. That sort of trying to be passive is more often than not, particularly when you're on the back foot, not going to work. Hamel's Dragon Knights over here. Hamel himself appears to be long dead. The attackers are moving forward, the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen proving their worth in melee. There's still the Blackback Mountain Berserkers here as well. And there is perhaps another reason why the defenders lost. They committed forward loads of resources. And in particular, I think maybe the initial attack out here with the infantry, especially with a unit like the Dismounted Knights of Illuminus from Arthedain, was perhaps a little bit foolhardy. And you know, the Witchers were thinking about reloading there. And yeah, I mean, I feel as though maybe that was not the best move. Like, yes, with some units, because it did ultimately cause some damage to the attackers, but I think maybe they overplayed that, they overcommitted, they didn't cut their losses and run when they could have. Now then, you can see the Hirialth and the Athalion Nanwaith are going to cover the other angle against the Snaga. The Aradirith still have some ammunition, but probably not going to be all that much of a factor, if we're being honest. Relatively close though. I mean, for a while I thought actually the defenders could carry their momentum to victory, but they squandered it a little bit towards the end, which is maybe a little bit unfortunate. It was always going to be difficult for them to win, to be fair. And there goes the entire unit of Aradirith from the Witchers. I know in the comments that people are going to be concerned about the Witchers and how powerful they are. I kind of agree. I feel as though maybe reducing their ammunition a little bit might be called for, because they can do such high levels of damage in certain situations that even if the defenders play really well, they could potentially then have the entire match ripped out from under them by a single shot from the Witchers, which is maybe a little bit too harsh. I feel as though, you know, just reducing their ammunition might be the answer, because I feel as though they do have their weakness. I mean, if you keep track of them well enough, they can be a little bit impotent, and they can be a complete waste of money. But particularly in this sort of situation where it's the attackers can afford to sort of lose resources more easily than the defenders, it can be a little bit awkward. The Athalion Nanwaith going to charge into these E-Strong crossbows again, getting plenty of kills here, but a little bit slow on the uptake there. And ultimately, it's over here where the defenders are going to lose out, because the Hirialth is simply going to be pushed out of the way by sheer numbers at this point. Minas Morgul chosen. Still some Angmar halberds alive.
Our foe has lost control of the castle.
Well, we do have the Athalion Nanwaith still fighting hard, but it's not going to be enough ultimately. The Goblin King bodyguard getting in here, which they will obviously lose to the Athalion Nanwaith, but there are going to be no pushovers. Here are the Witchers. I think they're still out of I think they're out of ammunition at this point. They've taken a lot of well, actually no. Looks as though they've got their sort of javelin-esque animation ready. See what they do. I mean, they could burn the Athalion Nanwaith to a crisp. In a way, though, the Witchers in this battle did prove that trying to be too passive can get you burnt, quite literally. Again, if the defenders wanted to be more passive, they needed to make a team-wide effort to do that. And Mirkwood should not have continued to send resources out of the town centre if that is indeed what they wanted to do. They should have kept everything back here and just made it as difficult as possible for the attackers, to use their ranged resources, which would have been a valid thing to do, but instead they sort of did a pick and mix approach, which I'm never a fan of, where they sent out sort of bits of their resources, keeping some in reserve. They should have gone for one or the other, and they didn't. But I think I'm going to get off Zace's back at this point. If he does watch this replay, he's probably going to be a little bit peeved that I've been so cheesed off with his tactics. There goes Thranduil. He's up on the walls here somewhere. The Witches are now actually in melee. And also the Goblin King Bodyguard, the Heavy Goblin Crossbows. We are now into essentially the closing stages of the map. Obviously the Witch Realm Blackguard proving to be tanks again. It's good to see Helm's Deep again. And honestly I think I prefer it without reshade, because it was smoother. If this had reshade, any of the blobs I wouldn't have been able to get remotely close to. So it's good to sort of have a little bit more stability. Yeah, obviously classic map Helm's Deep. One of the first maps I ever covered actually as far as a battle replay goes, I believe. Back in vanilla. Yeah, the Athalion Nanway just getting overwhelmed, and again this is another, I know I keep harping on about it, but this is another reason why just keeping a unit of elites back in reserve on their own, they're not going to be able to do much because they'll just be overwhelmed by numbers like this. I mean, it's not as if they had to face a great deal of really strong units. Really the Goblin King Bodyguard and partially the Witches in melee would have been the problem, but here they just got overwhelmed by sheer numbers. You know, they need support and they didn't have it. Meanwhile over here, the Hirialth, very similar sort of situation over here. A single unit of Hirialth is not going to be able to stem the tide for too long. But still, it was still an enjoyable battle, and you know, honestly, you know, I thought the defenders were going to be able to do something in this battle when the attackers only opened up one hole. And when the catapults started getting a lot of friendly fire, causing routes for the attackers. But ultimately, the attackers weren't quite able to, the defenders, sorry, were not quite able to keep themselves organised enough and decide upon a single strategy in order to win this, because this was very winnable for the defenders, I think. Particularly seeing as Mirkwood were the forces that they had left in reserve at the end. But as it is, the attackers managed to get their ducks in a row and win the fight overall. So Helm's Deep falls, the forces of evil are victorious, and based on the fact that the Witches got, you know, some very critical hits, and based on the fact that the Orcs have won, I'm sure that there will be dislikes on this video. Which disliking for that reason alone is not particularly helpful as far as I'm concerned. But, as it is, the replay is finished, so I'm not sure whether there was a crash at the end or whether Master Blaster just left the game before it was done. But even so, obviously very little left in the tank, so we won't be able to see the kills, unfortunately. But it would have been from Arthur Dane's point of view anyway, and I feel as though it would have been fairly average kills across the board. MVPs. Difficult to say. I feel as though all of the defenders, maybe Mirkwood, a little bit lower because of the mistakes they did at the end. Attackers, the Misty Mountains certainly bore the brunt of the initial onslaughts, which is brave, although maybe not deserving of an MVP. You know, Angmar obviously did a lot of damage as well with those Witches. The elites also did good. The Trolls of Gundabad were one of the main reasons that that defense around that breach ultimately fell. But yeah, so let's get away from the battle sound effects while I speak and sort of wrap up as we have a look over Helm's Deep. You know, just sort of corpses very far away from the settlement. Good to see sort of a sally out as well from Helm's Deep, because it does add a bit of variety, even if maybe adding a bunch of too much infantry to the mix, I feel, because again, that unit of dismounted Knights of Illuminus could have made a bit of a difference in the late game. They're very strong. But yeah, big thank you to Master Blast for sending this to me. Good to see Helm's Deep again. As I said, probably just going to be, you know, going for one video every 2 days again, just so that I'm not saturating the content. Because again, if it were just me, it wouldn't have been making Third Age Reforged content. It wouldn't be such a big deal, because then obviously it would just be a matter of me trying to get stuff out as quickly as possible. But it's not, and it's good that it's not, because more variety is always a good thing to sort of showcase the mod. But as it is, more recently, more people have been making videos as well. There's been a couple in particular who've been making. I think Coda is one of them, and then there's someone else as well who makes a pretty, you know, decent volume of content. Honestly, the name escapes me, so apologies for that. But even so, with these new people making content, and obviously still with J Monster, still with Gondorian Smith, myself, occasionally the official channel put something out as well, and I think Cannon Fodder is actually coming back to do stuff for the 0.97 patch, which is in sort of imminent, and that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to get all of the 0.96.1 stuff out of the way now, so that I'm, it's one of the reasons why I'm not, just too eager to sort of immediately jump in on the 0.97 stuff as it's being showcased, because I want to get all of this stuff out of the way now, so before it becomes sort of defunct, essentially. But yeah, so there's going to be more, and that's one of the reasons why I'm eager maybe not to oversaturate the amount of content that's being put out. And obviously Reshade, feedback is obviously welcome on all of these things. If literally everyone says no, don't do this, then I will sort of reverse that. But with the volume of content and with Reshade, those are the two things that sort of looking at now. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next, which I'm not sure. I think, honestly, ironically enough, I think the two things that I've got, sort of larger scale battles I've got in reserve, are another siege on the Grey Havens and a night siege on Thranduil's Halls, which, it's one of the reasons why I like seeing scenarios, because it honestly adds more variety, and I'm sure people do get sick and tired of the same maps, but I mean, we'll see. I mean, the Thranduil's Halls one is a little bit different, so it might be that one, although I was thinking of saving that one for Halloween for reasons that would be immediately apparent. But still, I hope you'll join me for whatever is next, and I hope you enjoyed this.